Am I ready for retirement? How much do I need to retire? Well, yes, me, but also you. We're talking about building a plan for success no matter what your age is. Knowing this information early on, in other words, where to put your money, can shape your future. So why not start right now, right here on UBS Trending? Well, hi back again, everyone. I'm Anthony Pastore, and welcome to another episode of UBS Trending. I'm sitting down today with my terrific colleague from the Chief Investment Office, Ainsley Carbone. Ainsley, good to have you here. We're talking about a topic here that I think strikes fear in the hearts of many. The question is, am I ready for retirement? So if somebody comes to you and says, Ainsley, am I ready? What's the first thing you tell them?
Well, for starters, there are a lot of things that we would tell them, but if we're just talking about the financial aspect right now, really it comes down to looking at how much you want to spend each year relative to how much wealth you have. So when we're talking about spending, we need to look at the guaranteed sources of income, such as Social Security, pension, annuity income, and then we also have to look at the portfolio. So for the purposes of this report that we're talking about today, we're really looking at how much you need to have in your investment portfolio so that you can withdraw the amount you need each year in order to support your spending, in order to fund that spending over the course of your whole retirement.
That makes sense. All right, so let's just use an example for the audience. So for me personally, I'd love to retire by the time I'm 60 years old and expecting to be in retirement for 30 years, for example. What do I need to start with today?
So using an analysis that we've done, it's looking at thousands of different market scenarios and a few different assumptions that we can get into. But let's say, Anthony, you've turned 60 years old, you're looking to retire and live your life for 30 years into retirement, and you tell me, Ainsley, I want to make sure that I can withdraw $100,000 from my portfolio each year. I'm invested in a moderate portfolio. How much do I need to have in my portfolio? Well, looking at our analysis, if you are looking to withdraw $100,000 in year one of retirement, then you would need to have 24.8 times your first year withdrawal amount. Said differently, at the beginning of your retirement, you need to have $2.48 million in your portfolio in order to support a $100,000 withdrawal annually and having that adjusted each year for inflation, just so that you can make sure that you're able to keep up with inflation.
Right, exactly. And obviously, like you said, there are a lot of assumptions in there. First of all, there's the capital market assumptions from CIO, there's market conditions, there's inflation, and then there's all the other things that, like you just said, there may be Social Security, you may have a pension, you may have other inheritance, or, we said maybe you'll win the lotto, and then things will change. But good, that's a good way to start. And obviously, it's a starting point, but not personalized for each individual investor. Okay, so let's take it the next step. What happens if I don't think I have enough to retire?
That's a good question. So there are a few different levers that you could pull. Not all of them are ideal. For instance, you could decide to cut your spending back, because if you don't need to withdraw from your portfolio as much each year, then you'll be able to retire with less wealth, or maybe it'll last a little bit longer. You could decide, maybe I want to work a couple more years. That not only means that you get to work a few more years and save a little bit more, but you could also not have to fund as many years in retirement. But when we're talking about how many years in retirement you have to fund, it's so important for people to understand the cost of planning for a long retirement and the cost of longevity. So if we're looking at the screen here, you can see the two bolded numbers that we have. If you're in the same investment portfolio, in the same level of risk, if you look at the number, the wealth to withdrawal multiple for a 30-year retirement versus a 40-year retirement, Anthony, if you were looking to withdraw that $100,000 each year, if you started at 60 and wanted to plan for a 30-year retirement, you'd need $2.48 million. But if you actually were going to live 40 years in retirement, you would need to start retirement with $500,000 more dollars.
Right, so you're looking at $3 million up front.
Yeah, so that's a lot of money. And so if it's a lot easier to plan for a longer retirement at the beginning, because let's say if you're at age 90, you've lived those 30 years in retirement, and you realize, wait, I think I'm actually going to live to 100. I'm going to have a 40-year retirement, and I wasn't planning for that. At 90, you probably can't go back to work and start making more money and saving more money. You're probably actually having a lot of expenses, like health-related expenses, long-term care maybe, And at that point, you just are limited in the amount of options that you have.
Right.
So that's why it's so important to plan for a longer retirement when you can. And looking at the tables that we have on this, that we were looking at before, they're really just benchmarks, but it's helpful to understand if you move around the table, what are the different levers that I can pull?
Yeah, it's really good to have that. Like you said, when you're thinking about your plan, hopefully you're not planning on the day you're retiring, you're planning ahead of time. And there's no late start. I mean, you start whenever you can, no matter what age you are, of course. But there is a lot that you have to consider. And there's also, and we've talked about this, your expenses will change over time on average. In the beginning, when you're a little younger in your retirement, with any luck, you're still healthy enough to do that traveling, or if you want to go see kids and grandkids across the country, go to different countries. If I want to plan that 1 month European cruise, great. But then as you get a little bit older, maybe your mobility's less, but then as you get even older than that, more healthcare costs come in. So it's not a steady $100,000 a year. It might fluctuate a little bit.
Exactly. And in the analysis that we had done, and to be honest, in most of these analyses that are done about this topic, they focus on basically taking one budget and applying a constant inflation assumption for that entire budget throughout your whole retirement. And like you said, in reality, when we actually look at the data, most families, or at least if we're looking at the average retired household in the US, the average household does not spend at a constant amount. Not only is it because the things that we spend our money on don't change in price at the same rate, but also what we spend our money on is going to change. Like you said, at the beginning of retirement, for instance, my grandmother was traveling all over. She'd travel to Italy, she'd go to Florida with her siblings. And then as she got older and wasn't as active, she would stay around and hang with us at home for a little bit more. And then later,
and spending less money,
exactly,
obviously,
spending
right.
less money, and then later in retirement, she needed more health-related care, and so those costs went up. So in reality, what we find is that it looks a little bit more like a smile, but everyone's going to be different. I think it's just important to note that your spending most likely isn't going to increase with inflation every single year, so it's important to just sit down with your advisor and try to figure out what your spending is going to look like. That way you can put a more accurate assumption into the plan.
Right. Like one set of my grandparents, they had no real health issues throughout their lifetime until really the end of their lives in their 90s. So their smile was more like a smirk on one side and a little flatter on the other. So they actually had more than they needed at the end, which was really great. And we felt very grateful for that they were healthy for all those years. But from a financial perspective, it actually worked out really well. So what's the next step for somebody who's listening to this conversation and says, I need to really nail down what I need to do to prepare here? What do you recommend that they do here at this point in the conversation?
I'd say sooner rather than later. If you haven't started this conversation with your advisor yet, this is definitely the time that you need to do it. I've never met anyone who said, I wish I had started saving or wish I had started planning later on. Everyone always wishes they had more money. So the sooner you can start the conversation, the better. And then I'd say the two most important aspects, in my opinion, would be making sure that you're planning for the right time horizon, not only your own life expectancy, but also if you're married, you want to make sure that you're planning for the whole household's life expectancy, especially if your spouse is someone who's younger than you. And then you also want to think a little bit more deliberately about what it is that you're going to be spending your money on in retirement and how that spending is going to change throughout retirement. Not an easy process,
No,
I know.
It's not. And it's not really even a fun conversation to have because you're trying to plan for the rest towards the end of your life. So I'm trying to think more of those first 10 or 15 years, what's the travel and the fun part of the retirement. But it is a really important thing to be talking about with your advisor, with your spouse, family, kids, friends, people who have gone through it, can give you advice, but this is a great way to start.
Yeah, and it's not something that's going to be, it's not like you have to sit here and say, Ainsley, I want to start my retirement today, 30 years, I already know what I'm going to spend. That's really not what's going to happen. In reality, we're going to sit down and we're going to review it on an annual basis and adjust it as needed.
Right. We didn't even really get into what the 4% rule is, but the title of the report that Ainsley wrote with her colleagues is Beyond the 4% Rule, Am I Ready for Retirement? So I would recommend getting a copy of that, and you can take a look at what the 4% rule is. It's one of these standards that has been around for a really long time, but you're rethinking how that works based on new assumptions and the markets, et cetera. So Ainsley, thank you very much. Love these conversations. They're sobering, but also eye-opening and very helpful. So good to see you.
Thank you.
Great. And for more information and to get access to that particular report that we're talking about, visit ubs.com/views. That's our insights page. You can also follow UBS on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, plus all of our past UBS Trending episodes, many of them featuring Ainsley Carbone right here to my left, are there as well for you to watch on demand. So if you have any questions about this conversation or anything to do with your portfolio or your retirement, make sure to speak with your financial advisor. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Remember to keep your eyes on what's trending. We'll see you soon.